My desk usually stays clean. As a 32-year-old financial analyst for a major brokerage firm, order is my currency. I deal in numbers, projections, and absolute integrity. But on the afternoon of May 14th, order completely dissolved. The chaos started not with a stock market crash, but with a simple text message. My phone buzzed, lighting up the corner of my mahogany desk in the downtown Chicago office. It was from my sister, Chloe. I smiled, expecting a question about the centerpiece arrangements for her upcoming engagement party. For the last 3 months, I had been living and breathing Chloe's wedding events. I didn't just help. I was the primary planner, the financial buffer, and the emotional punching bag. I opened the text. It hit me harder than any financial downturn could. Just wanted to let you know, you're not worthy of coming to the engagement party. Don't call, don't show. We're recalibrating the guest list. I sat back, the air knocked out of my lungs. My name is Leah, and until that moment, I believed family meant something. Chloe, at 30, was accustomed to having things her way. She was marrying Mark, whose family's wealth, old money from Texas oil, had recently given her a major case of social vertigo. She'd spent months dropping names, obsessing over vibe, and making sure her life looked like a magazine cover. I, the hard-working sister who paid my own way through Wharton and tracked investments for a living, was suddenly not the vibe. My first instinct was confusion, then a searing fury. I had personally secured the venue, a stunning penthouse space overlooking Lake Michigan. I negotiated the contract with the head caterer, Maria, who only took clients through referral. My referral. I knew every guest list detail, every floral arch measurement, and every penny spent. And the pennies spent were the real issue. This wasn't just any wedding. This was a $50,000 wedding, entirely funded by an account Chloe and I had set up 6 years ago. It started as an investment vehicle, but we both agreed that when her wedding day arrived, that money plus the growth would be her gift. A massive head start for her new life. I was the sole manager and co-signer. Legally, the account was structured to prevent withdrawals without both parties' signatures, a precaution put in place because Chloe has the impulse control of a toddler in a candy store. I immediately tried calling her. No answer. I tried Mark, straight to voicemail. My mother, Nancy, answered on the third ring, her voice already edged with passive aggression. Leah, you're not going to make a fuss about this, are you? It's Chloe's big day. Mom, I just received a text telling me I'm not welcome at the party I planned and paid for, I stated, my voice dangerously calm. What is going on? Mark's mother, Brenda, she made some suggestions, my mother whispered conspiratorially. She said the guest list was too nixed. They want to keep the energy exclusive. You know, high-end. It's not personal, darling. It's business. Not personal. The phrase felt like a dagger. For 3 months, my business had been making her party perfect. Now, I was collateral damage in her attempt to climb the social ladder. I don't care about the party, I said, leaning forward and speaking directly into the phone. I care about the account. Is the money safe? My mother paused. The silence was heavy and thick with guilt. Well, Chloe needed to cover the final vendor deposits, honey. Big costs. We'll talk about it later. I didn't wait. I hung up on her and immediately pulled up my secure banking portal. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from a terrifying realization. If they could exclude me this easily, what else could they do? The system loaded. I navigated to the joint investment account, the one specifically labeled C&L Wedding Fund. My blood turned to ice. The balance was zero, $50,478.12. Gone. cleared out in one lump sum transfer dated 3 days ago. The account terms clearly stated that any withdrawal over $10,000 required my written and notarized consent. This was not a mistake. This was not a final deposit. This was fraud. Chloe hadn't just uninvited me. She had stolen my investment, my effort, and the only leverage I had left. The text still glowed on my screen. "You're not worthy." A cold, hard resolve set in. I was no longer an older sister trying to help. I was a financial analyst whose client had committed fraud, and I knew exactly whose name was on all the vendor contracts for that beautiful, expensive, stolen party. I was going to make sure that the only thing recalibrated would be her entire future. The shock of the empty account quickly gave way to a surgical calm. As a financial analyst, panic is an expensive liability. I immediately pulled the bank's internal withdrawal log. There it was, a falsified document, supposedly bearing my signature, authorizing the $50,478.12 transfer to Chloe's personal checking account. It was a crude forgery. But forgery is a criminal offense, not just a family dispute. I drove straight to my parents' suburban home. I didn't call ahead. I found Chloe and Mark sitting in the living room, surrounded by open boxes of Italian porcelain wedding favors. They looked up, annoyed, as if I were interrupting a pivotal scene in their glamorous lives. "Where's the money, Chloe?" I didn't bother with greetings. I held up my phone, the zero balance glaring from the screen. Chloe didn't even flinch. She set down a miniature porcelain dove and sighed theatrically. "God, Leah, are we really doing this?" "It's complicated, okay? We needed the capital injection. The final catering payment was due, and Mark's mother needed to secure the honeymoon villa deposit. We'll pay you back after the wedding." "You forged my signature," I stated, my voice low and dangerous. "That's theft, not a loan. You had me barred from an event I planned, and then you stole the fund that was supposed to secure your future. You burned the bridge and then took the foundation." Mark, finally sensing danger, stood up. He wasn't intimidating, just entitled. "Look, Leah, we're family now. This isn't your business. It's a marital investment. Chloe is under a lot of stress." "It became my business the moment you criminalized it," I countered, turning my attention to my parents, who had just shuffled in from the kitchen. "Mom, Dad, did you know she forged my name?" My mother wrung her hands. My father, typically stern, avoided my gaze. "Leah, honey, we told Chloe it wasn't the best idea." Dad muttered, "But Mark's mother was pressuring them for payment. We assumed you'd understand. Family helps family, right?" "Family doesn't steal, Dad," I replied, the truth hitting me hard. They were all complicit. They hadn't stopped her. They had enabled her. They had implicitly agreed that my financial stability was their personal ATM, accessible at any time, especially if it secured their access to the wealthy Mark. I turned back to Chloe. "Here's the deal. Transfer the full $50,478.12 back into the account by the end of the day, or I involve the police." Chloe laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Go ahead, ruin my wedding, ruin your reputation. We'll just tell everyone you're having a mental breakdown because you're jealous." That was the moment the last thread of sisterly affection snapped. I realized they saw me not as a sister, but as a resource to be exploited, and a liability to be discarded. I walked out. No tears, no shouting, just a cold determination to restructure their reality. The first call I made was to Sarah. Sarah was my best friend and an attorney specializing in corporate litigation. She understood contracts and leverage. "Sarah, I need to know my contractual liability for Chloe's wedding." I explained the situation, detailing how I had acted as the primary signatory on the major contracts, the Lakeview penthouse venue, the Teresa Morgan catering agreement, and the massive non-refundable deposit for the custom Italian linen rentals. Sarah was silent for a long moment. Leah, if the primary party responsible for the deposit and coordination, that's you, formally withdraws their services and authorization due to a provable, fraudulent breach of contract by the secondary party, the vendors are protected. Legally, you didn't hire the service for yourself. You acted as an authorized agent. If the principal client has committed theft related to the funds, your legal relationship with the vendors is terminated. So, if I send a formal, legally backed email to the vendors, revoking my authorization and notifying them of the breach, what happens? Sarah paused, a slight smile audible in her voice. The contracts you signed require your oversight and coordination. Without your final authorization, the vendors, especially the venue and caterer, have grounds to execute their cancellation clauses immediately. They won't risk showing up if the primary contact has flagged a massive financial discrepancy on the project. It saves them time, labor, and potential lawsuit risk. The wedding gets shut down. And the cancellation fee? Paid for by the funds already deposited, which, thanks to the non-refundable clauses, are already gone. The $50K Chloe stole won't even cover the vendors suing her for breach of their final payment terms. She won't get a dime back. The loss will be total. I looked at the calendar. The wedding reception was scheduled for Saturday. Today was Tuesday. The final non-refundable vendor payments were all due on Wednesday. My plan was set. I wouldn't use the police yet. I would let Chloe walk right up to the finish line of her perfect day, using stolen money, and then I would pull the entire world out from under her feet with a single, perfectly timed, legally watertight email. First, I had to ensure my own safety. I booked a flight to a remote, silent cabin in the mountains of Colorado for Friday morning. I wasn't going to be in Chicago when the fallout began. The next 3 days were agonizingly quiet. I didn't return any calls. My phone logs were a testament to their escalating anxiety. 37 missed calls from my mother, 21 from Chloe, and 5 terse texts from Mark, demanding I stop being dramatic and transfer the funds for the final vendor payments. The final due date came and went on Wednesday. Without my authorization, the transfers couldn't be made. And the vendors were left holding unsigned checks and non-refundable deposits, a key factor that would protect them later. I responded to nothing. Silence was my new currency, and their frantic calls were the only payment I needed. On Friday morning, I boarded a flight to Denver, connecting to a tiny regional airport near the Rockies. I pictured Chloe and Mark bustling around their Chicago apartment, oblivious to the ticking financial time bomb I had set. They were probably finalizing table settings and worrying about the seating chart, confident that their wealth and my parents' pressure would force me to cave at the last minute. They were wrong. When I arrived at the rustic rental cabin, the air was sharp and clean. I opened my laptop, checked the flight path, and smiled. I was over 1,000 miles away, fully insulated from the impending chaos. The only thing left to do was press send. The wedding reception was scheduled to begin at 5 p.m. on Saturday. Vendor setup was slated to start at 9 a.m. I decided on a window of maximum impact and minimal time for the antagonists to salvage the situation. I drafted the email precisely at 8 a.m. Saturday morning, Chicago time. I sent it simultaneously to Carlos Ortiz, the Lakeview Penthouse venue manager, and Teresa Morgan, the high-end caterer. I blind copied Sarah for legal record. The email was stark, professional, and devoid of emotion. Subject: urgent, revocation of authorization and notice of financial fraud. Marshall Brooks event, May 18th. Dear Mr. Ortiz and Miss Morgan, please be advised that I, Leah Marshall, am formally revoking my authorization and coordinating services for the Marshall Brooks event scheduled for today, May 18th. This revocation is due to a verifiable Material breach of contract and financial fraud committed by the principal client, Chloe Marshall, concerning the required $50,000 in payment and operating capital, which was unlawfully diverted from a protected investment account. Documentation of the fraudulent withdrawal has been submitted to my legal counsel. As per Clause 7.c of your service agreement, without the authorized financial guarantor and professional coordinator on site, you are within your contractual rights to immediately cease all setup and service delivery to protect your business from financial exposure and liability. To minimize your legal risk, I advise you to halt all services immediately. I apologize for the inconvenience this gross misconduct by the principal client has caused your teams. My attorney will follow up with documentation on Monday. Sincerely, Leah Marshall. Authorized signatory, Marshall Books Contracts. I hit send. It felt less like an act of revenge and more like a necessary financial correction. I closed the laptop, walked out onto the porch, and watched the sunlight hit the mountain peaks. I didn't have to wait long for the chaos to begin. At 8:30 a.m., my phone, which I had turned back on, but kept silenced, began to light up with notifications. First, 2 identical texts from Carlos and Teresa. Leah, what in the world is happening? We are pulling out immediately. Legal is involved. Then the family barrage began. 8:45 a.m., Mom, voicemail. Leah, what is this email? Carlos is tearing down the decorations. He says you canceled the venue. You're ruining your sister's life. Her voice was hysterical, shattering the mountain calm. 9 a.m., Chloe, text, all caps. You bitch, the caterer just drove off. Teresa is suing us. This is my wedding. You can't do this. 9:15 a.m., Mark, voicemail, panicked. Leah, listen to me. My mother is here. We have to call them back right now. This is not a joke. The party was supposed to start in 8 hours. At 9:15 a.m., the venue was already being stripped bare. The caterer, terrified of being tied to a financial fraud case, had pulled out. The luxury linen company, hearing the news, refused to deliver the rentals. The cancellation was total. The engagement party, funded by theft and built on deceit, had collapsed before the first glass of champagne could be poured. Chloe and Mark were left standing on a bare penthouse rooftop, facing an angry family and a mob of confused vendors demanding payment that had already been stolen. My phone continued to buzz with the soundtrack of their destruction, but I didn't listen. I walked back inside the cabin, made myself a cup of tea, and finally allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. I stayed in the silent serenity of the Colorado cabin until Monday morning. The barrage of communication eventually subsided, replaced by terse, desperate voicemails from my parents, and a few threatening texts from Mark's number, which I quickly forwarded to Sarah. I wanted them to stew in the mess they had created. When I finally landed back in Chicago, the difference was palpable. I wasn't the wounded sister who fled. I was the financial analyst returning to collect a debt. I wasn't home for 2 hours before the doorbell began to chime incessantly. Chloe, Mark, and my parents were standing on my porch. Chloe's face was blotchy, streaked with remnants of dried tears and fury. Mark looked pale and sweaty. I opened the door, but didn't invite them in. I stood framed in the doorway, a human barrier of calm professionalism. "You ruined my life," Chloe shrieked, lunging forward. "Teresa Morgan is suing us for breach of contract. The venue kept the deposit. You maliciously destroyed everything. You ruined your life when you stole $50,478.12 from a protected account," I corrected, my voice level and cold. The email I sent was a legal notification of financial fraud, protecting my reputation and the vendor's interests. You committed the breach, not me. "We're family, Leah," my mother pleaded, tears welling up. "You can't let your sister be sued. We'll talk to Mark's mother. She'll help." "Mark's mother has already severed all contact," Mark interrupted bitterly, finally speaking. She withdrew their financial support and is furious about the public embarrassment. She said the lack of integrity is unacceptable. I nodded, utterly unsurprised. Good. Now we can deal with the adults in the room. You have 48 hours to wire the full amount, plus 5.5% interest, back into the account. If the funds are not immediately secured, I will be filing a police report for criminal forgery and a civil suit for full damages. Sarah has the paperwork prepared. My father finally stepped forward, his face etched with defeat. We don't have it, Leah. Chloe spent it on a down payment for a luxury condo deposit, and Mark spent a good portion on a lavish bachelor party. Then you will face the consequences of your choices, I concluded. You taught me that family uses family. I simply followed your lesson to its logical conclusion. You can no longer use me. Now, leave my property. I closed the door gently but firmly, cutting off Chloe's renewed cries. The quiet click of the deadbolt felt like a physical act of liberation. I gave them the 48 hours, but no wire transfer ever arrived. On Wednesday morning, I was at the police station with Sarah, filing the criminal report for forgery and grand larceny. Simultaneously, Sarah filed the civil suit, naming both Chloe and Mark. The vendors, who were already furious, happily provided evidence of the canceled checks and the chaos I had preemptively prevented them from walking into. The combined legal and financial pressure was catastrophic. The consequences were swift and total. Financial ruin. The vendors won their suits, claiming the bulk of the money Chloe had stolen as non-refundable losses and cancellation fees. Mark and Chloe were left with massive debts and a canceled engagement. The condo deposit was forfeit. Social isolation. The scandal surrounding the fraudulent wedding and the lawsuits spread quickly through Mark's social circle. Mark left Chloe shortly after, unable to bear the financial and social disgrace. The $50,000 recovery. Through the civil suit, I secured a judgment lien against Chloe's future assets and earnings, virtually guaranteeing that every major financial decision she made for the next decade would be monitored until the full $50,000 was repaid. My parents tried to maintain contact, alternating between pleas and accusations of heartlessness. I blocked their numbers and emails. I had learned that my family wasn't a support system. It was a financial liability, demanding endless, thankless investments. 1 year later, the judgment was fully recorded. I received the first small check from Chloe's garnished wages. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. I stood on my apartment balcony, sipping coffee. There were no frantic calls, no passive-aggressive texts, and no requests for money. My focus was back on my career, my friends, and my own peaceful life. The lesson I learned on that quiet mountaintop stayed with me. Betrayal has an interest rate, and I was no longer willing to pay it. Family ties are strong, but the line between love and exploitation is razor thin. When they crossed that line, I simply used the rules of their own financial game to ensure that their loss was total and my peace was absolute.